Thank you so much for being here this evening. I'm just going to give you a very brief and quick overview because the reason you're here tonight is to hear from these folks. But the Center for Civic Innovation is an organization that has been around for a little over 5 years now. And we started this organization to do exactly this, which was to bring people together who cared about our city and talk about the things that are going great, but also be able to challenge the things that aren't going so great and have conversations on how we actually move toward improving against those things. So 5 years ago, Atlanta was in the news for some amazing things. Our skyline was coming back. We had businesses started booming again. But also 5 years ago, Atlanta was named the most unequal city in the United States. And so for us, we are an organization that is focused on eliminating social and economic inequality in our city. And we look at that in two ways. One is about investing in the work that's already happening on the ground and making sure that the solutions that are being put in place to tackle social and economic inequality are actually working. We invest in some really incredible community projects. We got a woman who's working in Oakland City to make sure that seniors can age in place. We have a psychotherapist who works inside the juvenile justice system to make sure kids who are trapped in the cycles, not of incarceration but of poverty, are not subject to the justice system going in and out of it, but instead finally being relieved of it. We have some really amazing initiatives that we support and invest in across the city. But the second thing we do is we want to improve and strengthen public participation. We want to make sure that people's voices are heard by decision makers. We stand by the fact that the things that are built for us, without us, are not for us. And so we have created this space as a place to have this type of dialogue. And so we were so excited when ThreadATL reached out to us to be able to host this conversation here. But I hope you'll get involved even beyond this conversation. This is one of many things that happen here on a monthly basis. We have breakfast with community leaders. We have additional panels. You can hear about some people who are doing amazing and incredible work. So I hope you'll get involved and engage in this organization and the work that we do. CivicAtlanta.org. Once again, CivicAtlanta.org is where you can learn more about us and get more involved in our program. I see a lot of familiar faces. Thanks for the fight and the work that y'all are doing. And this is a safe space for conversation. So if y'all need to yell at Brian McGowan at any point in time, whatever you need to do, that's no problem. We're grateful our board chair is also here on this panel. But thank you again. Thank you, ThreadATL, for hosting such an important conversation. So thanks.
I'm just going to take a minute to introduce the panel moderator, King Williams, who is also the newest board member for ThreadATL. He is a multi-talented person who impressed me immediately with his skills in interviewing people and a podcast he has and a video channel he has. He's also a filmmaker and an author. Take it away, King.
Thank you, Darren. I'm King Williams. I am the newest and the 11th member of the ThreadATL board. I am from Atlanta, Georgia. More specifically, I'm from East Atlanta and Decatur. So if you guys have been born and raised in Atlanta, you know where that's at. I'm here today to actually go over a lot of things about where we're going in Atlanta. And so for anyone who's known me over my history, whether or not I was a student, whether or not as an adult, as a filmmaker, you know I love Atlanta. You know I'm passionate about Atlanta, and you know I'm always concerned about where Atlanta is going. The four people that we have on here in the panel have had some impact regarding the city of Atlanta, in particular their dealings with Invest Atlanta or their critiques and criticisms of where we're going in terms of taxation and our planning. With that said, this is not a panel to beat up on Invest Atlanta. This is also not a panel to praise Invest Atlanta. We're going to have a real dialogue with real criticism as well as points that actually work. I have some people here who are more well-versed than I am, and that's the reason why they're here tonight. We're going to start out first with Mr. Julian Bene, and he's going to give you an introduction of who he is and what he means to Atlanta.
Thanks, King. So I served on the board of Invest Atlanta for 8 years from 2010 to 2018. I came in as an independent and I left as an independent, and I'm more independent now since I don't have to be nice to anybody at all. Well, occasionally my wife. So I came at this from a management consulting background, MBA, all those evil things, but I've always believed that government has to play a very important part in folks' lives, especially the less well-off. And we have a lot of less well-off in the city of Atlanta. And so I'll be, my answers to some of these questions will be coming at it from that. But I did spend 8 years on the board, and I was cheerleading for a lot of things that now you have to say, was this entirely right? Or were there some unintended consequences? So I think we've got some interesting conversation.
Thank you. My name is Fred Smith. I'm a professor of law at Emory. Grew up in Athens. Deeply love Atlanta. I just want to say deeply honored to be on this panel. I've read a lot of your op-eds, King. Julian, Bene, in my view, really became the conscience of Invest Atlanta, and the critiques that he raised still kind of echo in the room, even when he's not present. And of course, Anna Foote has been a board member before, and just a frequent and important voice. And Brian McGowan, all of you know who he is, and the work that he's done both with Invest and Development, and then the standard that he's setting in the way of economic development nationally. Such an honor, and I have to say, I'm delighted to say, that two of my colleagues from the board of Invest Atlanta are present, Bill Bozarth and Michelle Benez. So I'm excited to have this particular conversation. We are very much, I think, as an organization, thinking critically about the choices that have been made in the past and how to do better, especially with respect to questions of equity. They are front and center in a way that I am pleased to see, but it's just the beginning. We're nowhere near done yet, and so it's gonna, well, not to talk too much, but that's gonna take a combination, yes, of people on the board, but also people in this room, because when your voice comes through, and when you speak and when you say, this is a bad idea, you can be and often are heard. So I'm so glad that people are paying attention to these issues.
Good evening, my name is Anna Foote. I am a native of Atlanta, Georgia, and I mean Atlanta. I spent the first 4 years of my life living in an apartment in the Margaret Mitchell house. And I spent most of my life in Ponce Highland, bought the house I was raised in, raised my child there, so 43 years in the same house. My parents helped start the Ponce Highland Neighborhood Association. I eventually became president of the Ponce Highland Neighborhood Association. 6 years, 7 years as 7 years as chair of the NPUN, eventually on APAB, eventually an appointee to Invest Atlanta, first by Shirley Franklin and then by Kasim Reed. So I was 9 years. I currently have an appointment to the Little Five Points Community Improvement District, and so I'm a representative for a community development organization that's trying to do some really good work in Little Five Points. I think the angle that I came into Invest Atlanta was from that perspective. It was from being a community person. It was from that community development perspective. It was really focused. I had no clue what any of the tools were in the toolbox when I walked in the door. But I was passionate about making sure that there was a voice on that board that spoke to and about the people that were in the city, because we can talk a lot about creating jobs, but we forget that there are people in those jobs, right? We can talk about building housing, but people go into those housing. So that for me was where I stayed focused. I'm very fortunate that I had an opportunity to help onboard a couple of leaders that came into Invest Atlanta. I was on the committee that found Brian McGowan, and I think he was one of the great assets that we brought to Atlanta, and I'm very appreciative of what he did to bring Invest Atlanta from a small development authority into global conscious. And I'm very honored to be sitting here next to him.
Hey everybody. I am the chair of CCI, so I want to welcome everybody here. And it's nice to be back home. So I'm currently the CEO of Greater Seattle Partners, which is a regional economic growth organization for the Puget Sound region. And I'm really thrilled to be back here and part of this conversation because I'm also a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institute, and I've been doing that for about 5 years. So we really look at and study the use of incentives and economic inequality and inclusion, building inclusive economies. So Atlanta was such a great experience for me. I couldn't keep a job here. I think I had four different jobs here. But it was great because I got different vantage points from the private sector to public sector to the development. It's just really amazing experience. And I was reminded, we have to remember where we were in 2011. So I was in the Obama administration and I got recruited down here, and I thought it'd be a great opportunity. Atlanta was always a city that I admired and thought, at the time I had a brand new mayor, and I looked at the design of Invest Atlanta, and it was a well-designed economic development organization. It had lots of tools, lots of authority. But at that time in 2011, to remind everybody, our phones weren't ringing off the hooks. There weren't companies coming. We didn't do a groundbreaking or ribbon cutting in maybe the first 2 years I was here. And it's pretty remarkable to see how far the city has come in the last 8 years. And one of the things I love in Seattle, when I tell people that I came from Atlanta, the reaction I get from people is, wow, Atlanta's got its shit together. So that's the perspective from the outside, that Atlanta's come a long way in a very, very short period of time. And it's something I think we all should be very proud of. But we have a long way to go. It's growing so fast, and what's most interesting from my experience in the last year in the Puget Sound region is it's one of maybe 5 regions in America that is experiencing hypergrowth. So it's the fastest growing economy in the United States. And it's creating real issues with homelessness and affordability. But that region has had hockey stick growth over the last 10 years. This region's growth has been a little more steady, which is more manageable from a public policy perspective. So I think the lesson that we need to remember or remind ourselves is that public policy tends to lag behind where the economy is today. And so if anything, when you're looking at organizations like Invest Atlanta or any other government entity or agency, you gotta keep up with the pace of growth. And I think what's happening in this region is just there's a lot of growth, and I think we're a little behind. I know the region I live in now is way behind, but you're not as far behind as we are. So that creates I think a real opportunity to make sure that you do things different than some of these really hyper growth regions. You have an opportunity to look and learn from the lessons in places like that.
All right, and I want to, for each one of you guys, we've got the first question, which is, when it comes to Atlanta, in particular, its relationship to Invest Atlanta, what is defined as a subsidy and what is defined as a benefit when you guys enter partnerships? For anyone who wants to start first. All right, when it comes to Atlanta and its relationship with Invest Atlanta, what is the definition of what's required to have a partnership or anything in regarding that? So how does Invest Atlanta decide what's going to be the
City of
partnership?
Atlanta. All right. Well, the Invest Atlanta is a separate authority. So in a lot of cities, the economic development arm of the city is a department of the city. Usually reports to a city manager or mayor, direct line to a city council. Invest Atlanta is different. It's actually an authority set up by the state of Georgia to do economic development exclusively for the city of Atlanta. So it's a little different. I think provides a little more flexibility, but it's because of that separation from the city council. You also have, creates potentially some issues of accountability and transparency, and so that's why it's really important for an entity like Invest Atlanta to have a really strong board that pays attention and looks at all the things that it's doing, and it's kind of keeping pace with what's happening in the current economy.
As a side note, the first 3 years I was on the Invest Atlanta board, the city of Atlanta did not give what was ADA at the time, didn't give a dime. Not.
Can you explain to me what that is?
First year you were there. First 3 years I was there.
Yeah.
First 3 years I was there. Zero.
And can you explain what that is? ADA, can you explain to me what that is?
Atlanta Development Authority is what the name really is. It's the legal name. Invest Atlanta became the AKA for Atlanta Development Authority. And there are several entities within that do specific kinds of work, housing, downtown development. So it's a little bit complicated, but it's not always as supported by the city as it should have been, and it doesn't always get as good a guidance from the city about what it should be doing, right? So it oftentimes is making decisions based on what's coming to it, right? A deal that's coming to it, as opposed to having very good, clear guidelines from the planning department. Through much of Shirley Franklin's administration, there wasn't a planner, there wasn't a commissioner of planning. So the process of providing good guidance to the organization that has the tools to do what you want to have done wasn't there. So it's only really been since Brian got here and the subsequent work that Invest Atlanta has picked up the kind of work that it's doing today.
And then just legally, right, Invest Atlanta gets its authority to act both by virtue of state law, so development authorities are authorized by the state constitution, and there's an intergovernmental agreement between the city of Atlanta and Invest Atlanta. That intergovernmental agreement is up for its next renewal in about 4 months. So it was originally up about a year ago. And because there's so many conversations right now about how to move the organization in a direction closer to an equitable vision, that's being worked out before approving another kind of 3 or 5 year intergovernmental agreement.
Okay, can you hold on for a second, Greg? Can you explain to people what that actually means? Because it seems very nice that you're saying that, but what does that actually mean?
Sure. So there's a few things. So Invest Atlanta has hired it's Bloomberg, but it's not the media Bloomberg. It's the foundation, and so for pro bono, they are doing a deep dive into the distribution of wealth across the city, into questions around where are jobs actually going, to questions around affordability, and so there's a community board that's been put together that has been meeting over the last 3 to 4 months, and then the city council, especially CDHS, which is the Community Development and Human Services Committee, they're kind of taking the charge with respect to this, and so they have had a number of meetings where they're tracking the progress, and so what the intergovernmental agreement will look like will reflect the input from that. There's also going to be a number of opportunities for community input. There's one, I believe it's on February 27th. Where there's, and I could get the details. Is which day? 24th and the 26th. And so in order to make sure that what comes of this actually is reflective, because this is, it's not enough to just talk about it, right? One has to be about it, right? And so that is why the intergovernmental agreement wasn't approved for 5 years. It was only approved temporarily for 1 additional year, and there won't be another 5-year one until that process has been completed.
Okay.
I just want one comment.
Brian.
Councilmember Matt Westmoreland deserves a lot of that credit. He really is the one that held up the renewal of that IGA to make sure that it was focused on equity and inclusion. So just want to make sure everybody understands that it really came. And that's exactly what elected official policymakers should be doing. You shouldn't just blindly renew your agreements with agencies like this. You need to actually read them, adjust to them, again, to the current conditions of the economy. That's exactly what they're doing, which is fun.
And so, keeping with that theme, Atlanta is a city right now that's going through a lot of things. The average person here is feeling the slower effects of income inequality across the board. We look to Invest Atlanta, we look to the city for leadership on how to kind of better plan our cities and make it more equitable. So, for you, anyone on the panel in particular who wants to take this first, what does equity and inclusion actually look like to you?
I was waiting for the Gulch question, but because that's not equity, all right? So handing vast amounts of money to billionaire developers is the opposite of equity, right? So Atlanta has tended to do that, right? We gave Arthur Blank $900 million for his stadium. Invest Atlanta was a vehicle for that. We were not really the decision maker at all, but it went through. The 1.9 billion to CIM Spring Street for the Gulch went through Invest Atlanta. It wasn't an Invest Atlanta decision, it was a mayoral decision. The big decisions here are made by the mayors, or have been, despite all the IGAs that we talk about. The reality has tended to be, or has been, the mayor decides and usually can command a majority of the board of Invest Atlanta to get ramrolled through what the mayor wants. That may be changing, and that would be healthy in my view if it did. So what does equity mean? So I told you what it doesn't mean, and it's pretty obvious, and that's, you remember President Obama used to say, don't do stupid stuff, was kind of where you started, and that really is what we should be doing too, is not do stupid stuff. It's much harder to do the positive things to benefit, say, a legacy community in English Avenue Vine City. The human changes are the toughies. But at least if you're not giving away money to the billionaires and you've got that money to pay for schools and teachers and bus drivers who work for the school, you've got it to pay for the cops and the firefighters and the staff who work in City Hall. If you're paying them a decent income, you're moving a little bit the needle towards equity. I don't think, and I asked this question a few times when I was on board, so what's our model? What are we trying to, who can we emulate who's figured out how to help the worst off in a city like Atlanta? We've got a lot of folks who are very low incomes and intergenerational poverty, as Matt Westwell often uses that term. And there aren't any very good models around. I mean, you can't go and say, okay, Baltimore's fixed it, we can copy them. There aren't. I think workforce development is clearly somewhere where if we stop throwing money away on prestige projects and billionaires and spend it on workforce development for low-skilled people, bring their skills up to a level where they could command a higher pay and a living wage, that would be helpful, for example. But I think it is those sorts of human development things that we have not grappled with. We've done a disgraceful job for as long as, and I've lived in Atlanta for 32 years, as long as I can remember, workforce development has been a sort of stepchild, has been mismanaged, disgracefully badly managed, and has not produced very much for the people who need it. So that would be the kind of thing. It's not, these massive buildings that don't do anything for the ordinary folks.
And I think you had something you wanted to say, or?
I want to build on that. Recently, Philadelphia published, I read it off of Pew's website, their review of, it was 2019, it was very recent. They are one of the few cities that actually goes back and takes a look at the impact of the dollars that they spend doing tax incentives, right? And they weigh all of the, I think they've got some 5 or 6 particular programs that the city does. They weigh, and one of the things that they do is they say, how much dollar return, what's the ROI, right? On their 5 programs, the one the one workforce development program that they fund, all their other funding to other programs is 6-to-1 ratio. It's 15-to-1 the return on ROI when you put the money into workforce development. So the program I work in, my office is in English Avenue. I'm on Boone at Lowry, if you have a sense about where that is. And what we do is work with West Side Works to bring financial literacy into their program and then recruit one-on-one financial coaching so that we can help bring financial stability and wealth building into that community. So it's a day-to-day event for us. And where I see the biggest bang for the buck is in our collaboration with workforce development agencies. So I'm building on that because I think that you're absolutely right. That and affordable housing, huge.
Just a quick comment on that. There are some states that don't allow incentives at all. It's against the Constitution. The state I'm in now, we don't give incentives. And companies still come because of the workforce. So workforce is the #1 draw. So we're the fastest growing economy in the United States with no incentives. What that should tell you is you want to work your way to the point where you don't have to give incentives. And that means you need to invest in things like workforce and transportation and make sure that you have affordable housing. Incentives are not something you should just kind of assume should always exist as a program. An incentive is to make somebody do something they wouldn't normally do, right? Yeah, and right. And so it should be something that you work your way out of. But you have to remember, when you're giving an incentive, you're taking money away from something else. And in this case, it's APS. Your biggest problem in this region is income inequality. So workforce training starts with your K-12 educational system. So, and I'm not against incentives. I was the CEO of the best line. We gave incentives. I believe incentives. I wish I had incentives in Seattle. But it's really just how you use the incentives and making sure you're understanding the sacrifice you're making by giving an incentive. The other thing, what some cities are doing, they're really focused on building inclusive economies. San Diego, Salt Lake City, a few other cities. When you apply for an incentive, you have to fill out a form. And the form asks questions like, how many people of color do you employ? Do you have down payment assistance programs? Do you subsidize transit for your employees? And then there's a score at the bottom, and based on that score, that's how they determine the incentive. What we did here, with the kind of the culture here, because I was peripherally involved with the HQ2 exercise, is everybody gets around the table. Which is actually in Bellevue, Washington. But HQ2, sorry, it's Amazon. The Amazon HQ2 exercise was a national competition. So everybody gets around the room and everybody maximizes. We figure out what can we give this company. So everybody piles in the middle of the table, and then we shove it across the table to the company. And we say, is that good enough? In the very least, we should chop the pile in half, keep half of it, and offer them half, and start a negotiation. But the state of Georgia does this too. It's just how do we we immediately go to how do we maximize the incentive. It should be how do we minimize the incentive, and what are we going to get in return? What's the public benefit for the incentive? So redevelopment agencies in California, I used to work in California, to give an incentive, it had to have a public benefit, a visible public benefit. So even if you were helping somebody renovate their house, an elderly couple, all the money had to be spent on the outside of the house. You couldn't spend any money on the inside of the house because they considered that a public benefit. So I think we need to do a better job in this region of thinking about, how does an incentive, provide public benefit to everybody. There's lots of ways to do that. You just don't dig into it.
All right, and sticking to incentives for you, Brian, I want you to hold the mic for a second. Could you explain to people how incentives are actually calculated? Because we hear incentives, we hear dollar amounts, but no one is getting like the 2 + 2 part of it. So how does that actually happen, and how does it work?
It's interesting to ask that question. I describe the way it works is we maximize.
If you're talking to my third graders, if we'll use the Gulf, a real world example. How is that benefit actually assessed, and how is that dollar amount brought to? Because that's a lot of money.
So I have no idea.
How do we reach that point?
Yeah, Julian will be able to maybe answer that question. But the way it should look, in my opinion, best use of incentives is if you're going to incentivize a project, you should look at how much affordable housing, not for 15 years, permanent affordable housing. It's this idea of organizations claiming we created 60 units of affordable housing. That was a leave out for 15 years, which is a real issue. You're kind of kicking the can down the road a little bit. You're not solving the problem. But in the case of the Gulch, and Julian and I talked about this a little bit, the public infrastructure that's required to build that thing up, I think that's eligible for an incentive. Things, sewer, water, sidewalks, streets. I think in this case the streets are going to be privately owned. I don't know exactly the details of it, but to me that's a reasonable, legitimate use of an incentive, is to build up what the public can use and what the public is going to see.
Okay, and now I know, Julian, this is you. This is your bread and butter. But, Julian, we got to keep this to a decent amount of time. We're going to stick again with you. If you're talking to my third grader, Julian, what is your criticism about the Gulch in that particular development?
Right. So I think you always have to start with your goals. What are you trying to achieve, right? So in the case of the Gulch, the only public purpose is there's a hole in the ground there at the moment. Now, you know, we did not, any of us here during the last mayoral election about the Gulch and how, you know, the administration was going to invest this enormous amount of money into the Gulch. And there's a good reason for that, is that none of you would care. Yes, there's a hole there. There is massive acreage around downtown and south of downtown that's available to be developed. We do not have a shortage of, you know, developable former light industrial warehouse land. So there is no need. So yeah, if you had a need to develop there, you would need to subsidize it. No, certainly the 50% of residents of the city of Atlanta who are on the lower end of the income spectrum have nothing to gain from this. In fact, none of us does, except, so who were the big winners? Cousins and Norfolk Southern, because they were able, through that deal, and that deal, by the way, is still in the courts and will be for many months, and hopefully will get thrown out by the state Supreme Court. We were just in with the state Supreme Court today on one of the three cases, an incredibly complex deal. But if it goes through, the winners are already Norfolk Southern and Cousins. Why? Because they own land there, which is worthless land. You know, it's useless at the moment, because a train is run through it and is useful to Norfolk Southern, but they wanted to sell the rights above it. So you have to start with a public purpose, and here there wasn't one. And you're giving away a vast amount of money. Now, the developer has said anything between $400 million and $700 million to bring it up to street level. So if you needed to, if you really needed to, then yes, you would have to subsidize it to that degree. They are going to be privately owned streets. You're not getting anything. What they're proposing is office buildings. You can have office buildings, you know, we've got plenty of room for office buildings all around town. We're doing it now. So, when you talk about, you know, how do we decide how much to give, you start with what you're trying to achieve, and then you have to have reasonable costs per whatever it is. So we've done crazy deals for affordable, so-called for affordable housing. What they are is developer welfare checks, where we are spending for the post-centennial, for instance, we're spending $20,000 per year for a unit which is subsidized, so the tenant pays $1,000 a month instead of $1,300 a month. That is insanity. We've got a lot of people in this town who need affordable housing. You ain't going to get there at $20,000 a year subsidy for one unit. It's crazy. So you have to start with your goal. If it's affordable housing, you figure out what do we think we can afford. If we need 10,000 units of affordable housing, it's not enough, but let's start with 10,000. What could we possibly afford and go like that? That's how you do it.
Okay. And Fred, my next question for you is, one of the things that a lot of people are critiquing, and the reason why a lot of us are here in this room tonight, is because people are really upset about the fact that public tax dollars are going to people who seem to not need these public tax dollars. Can you explain, at least in your assessment of what you know, why taxation in particular has been used as a vehicle for like a lot of this economic development? Why has it not been like necessarily a special bond or something else? Can you explain in particular like the different forms of tax increment financing that we're doing?
Yeah. So for the record, I voted against the Gulch. I just want to put that out there in case there's any doubt about that. But in terms of why a tax, so there's actually a couple of types of incentives. Not all of them are tax-based. So some of them are done in terms of grants. So for Anthem, for UPS, today in committee for Goodwill, for for something they're doing on the south side that's going to create 50 jobs. The tool there was grant rather than tax break. In terms of why does tax break happen, you know, I think that one reason is the rhetoric that is able to be used around it. That I think that we are now in a political moment in which people have noticed this and they're upset about it. Thank God, right? But I think before, right, it was the writing of the big check that they thought was more potentially, you know, perhaps politically toxic than tax break. But I think what people started to notice is you can call something a tax break, but if it's to a very specific corporation or company, then that is a subsidy. And that is money that could, has been pointed, that's money that could go to something else that actually is a public good. That's something that could go to education. That's something that could go to transit. That's something that that could go, as noted, to affordable housing, right? And so fortunately, people I think understand both of these are different types of incentives. And the mere fact that you call it a tax break doesn't mean that it's not a giveaway, especially with respect to projects that would happen anyway, right? So when it comes to things where that don't pass the but-for test, right? The things where they're gonna happen regardless of whether they get the subsidy, those in particular, right, are just straight up giveaways because you don't, it's hard to see what the public return is there.
And I was thinking of you for a second, Fred, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're still with the board of Invest Atlanta?
That's right.
All right. And since Invest Atlanta is currently going to be in renegotiation with the city, is there anything in these renegotiations that's going to reflect a better policy related to affordable housing or economic development for small businesses?
I believe it will.
Okay.
Right. So, you know, I can't predict exactly what's going to be in the agreement. I don't want to I don't want to be in quite that prediction business, but based on what we've seen so far, even, right? So if you look at the Community Loan Fund, which
Can you
was...
explain what that is?
Yeah, so the Community Loan Fund is something that came out of, also out of CDHS this time by Councilman Antonio Brown, and it's a loan fund for small businesses in particular, including small businesses that might be more of a risk. So situations where people they may not have the best credit because they leveraged everything in order to create their business and they don't have millions, let alone billions of dollars. And so it's targeted in that particular way. And so that just got off of the ground. And it's a combination of private money and then some money that the city put up as well. And so by virtue of the fact that we're seeing things like that, the fact that we're seeing affordable housing projects where more and more we're seeing things like 30% AMI rather than seeing things over and over again like 80% AMI, right? Sorry about that. That's area median income, and so because Invest Atlanta, the focus is workforce housing, right? In the past, a lot of the affordable housing has been in the 80% range. Increasingly, I think what has been noted is that that's not going to do the trick, and that perhaps Invest Atlanta needs to kind of step into a role of deeper affordability that's not happening in other agencies at the risk of getting trouble. And so we're seeing more and more in the way of kind of 30% AMI. We're seeing more and more in the way of things like land trust type developments. Amanda Ryan is here, where the city, if the city for any moment, if the city for just long enough to put documents together owns property, then what they're able to do is put what's called ground leases into them, where you can have affordability for at least 99 years, right? Because if it's ever owned, then you can put into the documents anything that happens on this property must be affordable, and you can do it with things that people own and that they can build equity in, and then they have to sell it at a certain rate, but they're still building wealth and building equity, which is one of the important goals here. And you can do it even with rental units, right? And so I would love to see much more of that. I've only been there for a little over a year, but in my time there, that's what I have become most excited about when it comes to creative ways when it comes to affordable housing.
Okay, and so one of the things, this is for every panelist, is affordable housing and affordability in Atlanta right now. We're definitely gaining in income inequality. We're definitely gaining in the number of units that are increasingly being moved out of the city that are affordable. Is there a plan, or has there been a plan from Invest Atlanta or the city of Atlanta on how to address housing affordability, excluding what Terry Lee is doing right now?
Yeah, so the answer is, well, depends on how you answer that question. Right?
I want to hear the answer.
Well, part of it is like I'm not the mayor's publicist, right? So but if she were here, she would say yes. There's a plan, right? There's the 500 billion, sort of 500 billion in public, 500 billion in private. Do I think that alone is a plan? Personally, no. I don't think that alone is a plan. If I were to create a plan, is that how I would create it? No, that's not how I would create it. I wouldn't ask how much money am I going to spend. I would ask how many units do I need and at what level and why. That would be where I would start. And then I would ask how much money do I need to do it. And then I would ask how much money do I need to do it over a long period of time rather than a short period of time. And I would ask, do I need another housing opportunity bond in order to meaningfully do that, which I personally think we probably do.
Okay, can you explain to me what that is?
Yeah, so a housing opportunity bond is, so just like any kind of public bond, you're kind of only, basically you're taking out a tax-free loan of sorts that you repay over time. Sometimes that's used to do things like roads. Sometimes that's used to do things like stadiums. But then what happens is, so you sort of pay. You pay it over time, right? And so
the municipality, not you have anything for you, the municipality or investment.
That's right, but that's that's us. That's all of us, right? Right. Even when I'm not on the board anymore, that's us. We're paying it. We're paying it back through our tax dollars, right? And so that's the particular bond mechanism, and I suspect that the scale of the problem. Here's the thing: no city has figured this out, right? San Francisco, sure as hell. That's where I moved here from. They didn't figure this out. New York hasn't figured this out. No one's figured this out. So we know that two things. We know that whatever we do, it's got to be creative, and we know that whatever we do, it has to be on a grand scale, right? And so I'm kind of on a soapbox right now. But
we'll put that box for a second. I think Brian's going to
I think it's important to point out that you cannot subsidize your way out of this problem. There's not enough money to solve the problem. So there's other tools like zoning and density and transportation and transit solve the problem too. And it also has to be, this is a regional problem as much as Atlanta thinks it's dealing with it. It's the entire region's dealing with it. So it's like squeezing a balloon. If you solve it in one area, it's just going to pop up someplace else in the region. What's happening in the United States right now is an increase in suburban poverty. So as prices go up in the urban cores, people are moving out to the suburbs, which that's intractable poverty because you're further from the schools, you're further from the jobs, you have no mass transit. So there has to be a regional solution, and there's not enough money to subsidize your way out of it. So this city, for example, is not a very dense city. So it's a population 470,000, 140 square miles. And just for comparison's sake, Seattle's population is 800,000 in 70 square miles. But it's surrounded by water, so it has to go dense. This is a very kind of suburban feeling city. So I think you have to think from a planning perspective, how do you increase density? And the other thing you got to keep in mind is, and Raphael Bostic from the Federal Reserve always says this, affordable housing is you got to build more. You just got to build more. So how can you expedite permitting for housing? Through City Hall. How can you incentivize? If you're going to incentivize something, incentivize that. How do you get more housing? It's supply and demand. It's a supply and demand issue at the end of the day.
And Anna, I have you ready?
Yeah.
All right. So I have a question for you in particular, which is you've been with Invest Atlanta for a very long time at this point, or informally. But one of the things people critique is when we see a bad incentive, we see a bad project, we automatically think Invest Atlanta has something to do with it. Can you explain some of the projects that Invest Atlanta has had a hand with or been accused of that you had really no part of?
Right now,
just said Fulton County because that's what was going through my head. So there are a lot of things that do not get on our radar that have gone very well with Invest Atlanta. And I keep thinking that the Gulch stands out for people, but I can name 10 other projects that I thought were fabulous. Money that came out of the TAD to do some really amazing things in the community, right? Those TADs were designed specifically to lift up communities, right? So I don't want to defend everything that Invest Atlanta's done. I just don't want the misconception to be that everything they do is circumspect.
Right, that's what I want.
But here is the thing that's happening, right? We want to have control about what's happening inside the city of Atlanta. We want our TADs to be respected. We want the agreements between a tax allocation district and Invest Atlanta manages the tax allocation districts, right? And they have, each one of them has a very specific set of rules about how those funds can be used and whether there's a reserve that can be used for grant money. It's all very, very specific. People can't just reach into it and start grabbing money out of it. We have a very specific relationship with the city of Atlanta and Fulton County, and they have a representative on the Invest Atlanta board. There is a city council person on the board. There is a Fulton County representative on the board. Anybody who says that Fulton County and the schools do not have representation on the Invest Atlanta board needs to go sit in a board meeting. Now, if their board members get there on time and actually engage in the process, that's up to them. I'm just saying they're there. Where was I going with this? Oh, yes. So, of late, an issue has been Fulton County has decided to put their footprint inside the city of Atlanta. And if the other piece of this that's really important is that we can't just think that Invest Atlanta is the only mechanism that is working in this field, in this area, right? So if a developer goes to Invest Atlanta and Invest Atlanta, because of its relationship with the city, says, here are the circumstances under which we would do this deal. You're going to need to hit these marks. You're going to have to, it's going to have to be good for the community. It's going to have a rate of return that we're going to be monitoring. You're going to have to do workforce development work, right? They go into Fulton County. Because all Fulton County cares about is the fee income they're going to make from doing that job, right? That deal. So it is a regional conversation. It has got to be municipalities talking to one another, and Invest Atlanta is not alone in this space.
I just want to build on that and say there is legislation in the state assembly at the moment. All of you need to be lobbying your state reps to get Development Authority of Fulton County out of the city of Atlanta. Atlanta absolutely said.
What's the name of the bill? Do you know the name of it?
No, but David Dreyer has one, and Chuck Martin has one, and Representative Martin is a Republican from forever. David Dreyer is a Democrat from in town, and they need to feel the pressure. It may not happen this year, and I agree with you, but the pressure needs to be there. The city of Atlanta has not exerted pressure in any serious way to get DAFC, Development Authority of Fulton County, out. It's ridiculous to have two development authorities competing with one another, and you get exactly what Anna said. Whenever I would question a tax abatement that came to Invest Atlanta, the first thing out of the mouths of the staff who were pushing it was, if we don't do it, DAFC will do it. You didn't have an answer to that. So.
And I have one question in particular about TADs, and Anna, if you want to start first. But one of the questions is, could you explain the need for a Midtown tax allocation district?
I cannot.
Well, anyone else would like to explain the need for a Midtown?
I don't recommend we go there.
I think we should.
I mean, seriously,
Okay.
there is sufficient capital and enough heat in Midtown. What a TAD is intended to do is completely unnecessary there. Where they're necessary is along corridors where they're not being activated the way they should, right? And where an example where it worked well, you can argue with me if you want to, but Atlantic Station had a very specific purpose. Those funds were used for that purpose. It's time to shut it down because it's done what it's supposed to do. And on to the next one. But it should be utilized as a tool for economic development in an area that needs the heat, not in an area that is as hot as Midtown. But that's my opinion.
Let's all vote on that. All right, Mark.
So, my California experience. In order to be a redevelopment project area, you have to demonstrate blight. And there's a legal definition for blight. You know, blight is abandoned homes, closed down commercial, high unemployment rate. And redevelopment agencies were actually eliminated in California because the city of Indian Wells, California, you ever been to Indian Wells, California? It's all golf courses. So they looked out in the desert and they said, that's blighted. And they called it a redevelopment area and they built a golf course with it. And so then the state legislature eliminated redevelopment agencies in California because of that and a few other bad examples. But you have to demonstrate blight. But the other thing I want to point out is that TADs, a purpose of the TAD is to increase property values. So when people say, well, you know, the Beltline's gentrifying, that's exactly what it's doing. It was designed to do that. It's a gentrification machine. It feeds off itself. So as it creates what they call tax increment, that tax increment, which, you know, and if somebody's running an agency, what you want is to increase the property values as quickly as possible, because then that money goes back into the project where you can build more stuff and do more stuff. You know, so I think I'm always stunned when people go, well, the TAD's gentrifying. It's like, well, yeah, that's what it does. It's what it does.
I want to respond to that though, because
Yeah.
to my mind, there's two ways that a city can grow in a way where new residents are coming in who are wealthy. One is that they live alongside the folks who are already there and become a part of the community. And the other way is displacement, right? And so there are ways in which there can be a focus on what TADs are intended to do in the way of increasing property values, because that is the only way that a TAD works. But then the question becomes, what is the responsibility with respect to how to use that TAD money, right? And the responsibility, right, then becomes all the more paramount to make sure that it's being put toward affordable housing and that it's not going toward displacement.
Okay. Julian?
So, I guess this is perhaps my sort of biggest regret of my time on the board, of what was going on in my time on the board, was that I think we started, and both Brian and Anna alluded to it, Fred's newer and is not, you know, part of that kind of legacy of the 2010 through 18. So the economy was pretty dead in Atlanta in 2010, 2011. And so we were excited about bringing in all these new jobs. And we had a hell of a run, guys. I mean, maybe not by Seattle standards, but by our own standards and by most people's standards. We were running 6,000 new jobs a year coming in, which is a lot for a city this size. It was an Amazon HQ too. By the time Kasim Reed had finished his mayoralty, he brought in about the same number of jobs as Amazon was talking about bringing in, and never did, of course, bring to anyone. But so 50,000, it's a big number, right? And we thought, this is good. Well, was it? You're into this unintended consequence thing. And by the way, incentives were only a small part of that. People wanted to come, they wanted the talent, they wanted the proximity to the airport, the other things we've got going, right? The low cost of living and so on. But the incentives we gave and probably helped bring some of the alignment. So we got all these jobs came. So what happened? It wasn't the TADs as such. The TADs certainly do what Brian said, they gentrify and all that. But just bringing in all those jobs increased demand for land and pushed up people's rents. And, you know, and what we didn't do, and what the Beltline didn't do, was grab cheap land ahead of time. That's about the only thing you can do. I agree with what everyone else has said. The money, I mean, Fred just wants to raise our taxes, and by the way, that's what you do if you were serious about this affordable housing and doing a seriously sized housing opportunity bond, then you should be out there convincing everyone that they need to pay higher taxes. Good luck, it's not going to be easy. It is not going to get, not a popular thing. My taxes are going to go up to pay for somebody else's subsidized housing. It's a tough sell. It's probably the morally right sell. But anyway, something smart to do other than just raising taxes would be grab the land early, to almost create huge community land trusts, own the land, and then. But what did we do? The opposite, right? We let people profit, but we're going to tip enormous amounts of money into the Beltline, right? And everyone nearby who happens to own the land suddenly gets rich for doing nothing. And then rents all around there go sky high.
Hold on, I want to keep that thought for a second, which is, there's a question from the audience that we have on the back end for any of the panelists. The question reads, how do we distinguish between investment and gentrification? For any of the panelists.
Good are my thoughts on gentrification.
For anyone? Any of our panelists right here?
I'm not sure that I'm clear about, I'm clear about what happens between displacement and gentrification. I'm not clear that I understand the correlation between investment and gentrification, but I'm going to take a stab at it because I drive into English Avenue in a fine city every day. So the biggest challenge that we have in English Avenue in Vine City right now is that 98% of the homes that are over there are rented. They're not owned by the people in them. And a huge percentage of those are owned by people who don't even live in this city. And as long as there was stability in that community, it may have been low stability, but it was stability. People could rent an entire house, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths. They could raise an entire family on a $750 a month rent. It wasn't the greatest house, but they could do it. And what's happening now is that the heat that's happening as a result of the awareness in that community. Yes, the Beltline is going through, big work is being done on Boom. There is this growing awareness of that community. Those people who've been living in those houses for 20 years or more are being displaced. They're being thrown out by the people who own those homes. They're modestly renovating them, and then they are putting them back on the market for rent at 3 times what it had been rented for before. And the biggest struggle that we're having right now is how do we help the legacy residents not just stay in the community, but benefit from what's coming into the community so that they get to take advantage of the financial stability, right? The wealth building that's happening in that community. How do we help them continue to participate in their community, stay where they want to stay, and take advantage? That's the difference. That's how you help the community invest and stay in their community, as opposed to the sort of negative connotations of gentrification or displacement, where they have no choice. They're going to end up in the suburbs because there isn't another option for them. And this is the moment when the city can step in. This is building land trusts that those properties can go into. This is figuring out how to do what Westside Future Fund did, which was build a pool from corporate contributions into a pool and help people who did actually own their homes get into this pool so that their taxes, as their taxes went up, the amount that they've been paying stays consistent, and as their taxes go up because of gentrification in that community, that amount, that difference, is being paid out of that fund, right? So there are ways of doing this, but they have to be very concerted, and they require a public and private conversation. It cannot just be Atlanta doing this alone. in where you are, one of the things on your website is very clear is that you have a public and private partnership that you work with to try to resolve and address a lot of the issues that you are working with. And I think Atlanta has not done as good a job bringing in those partnerships and making that, making it more viable for them. The space that they walk into at Westside Future Fund is an example that really hasn't much existed before.
Right, okay. And so one question I have for you,
at some point, I don't know exactly when, but at some point, the $200 million of motel tax and hotel tax that currently goes to the stadium, right? At some point, there'll be a question about where should that money instead go? And I hope that at that moment, that the answer is something that is more public serving than a stadium. Even though I'm a big Atlanta United fan and Falcons fan too. But in terms of where that public money should go, I hope that I hope that it is affordable housing, and I hope that it's transportation on course like so I just want to put that out there, right? That's going to be a lot of money that at some point we have to think about.
30 years from now.
Yeah, so that's, sorry, it's a lot of money. It's $30 million a year now.
what's $30 million a
It's
year?
the hotel motel tax. The portion of the hotel motel tax that goes to Arthur Blank, the stadium, is $30 million a year. I thought on that one, and I thought it was less. Back in 2013, it was less. I thought it would be about $500 million in total. It's now going to be $900 million. It'll be more than that, but right now, at current run rate, it's $900 million he's getting. That one would have liked to have seen purpose for something useful, but we're stuck with that for 30 years. Look at the Gulch. If we win the lawsuit on the Gulch, we'll save the city about $870 million over a period of 20 years for some 30 years. So that's money that will come in that wouldn't if Gulch deal goes. So that would be money potentially available. I mean, you won't see it, you won't be able to label it, because what that will be is that the buildings that would go in the Gulch and not pay property taxes and the sales tax not be paid, those buildings will be built in Midtown, around the Beltline, where they're currently being built, and they will pay taxes, and so we'll have higher tax revenues if we're successful in nixing the Gulf deal. So you all need to pray for us.
Okay, so I got a question for all of you, which is, right now we know for sure that there's going to be a new renegotiation. If you could see one thing changed about the renegotiation between Invest in Land and City, what would that be? Just one thing.
Clarity from the city to Invest Atlanta about where to put the priorities for the funding, right? I want to make one thing really clear. There are laws, there are federal and state laws that dictate some of what we're talking about here. This money that's going to pay from the hotel motel tax, Arthur Blank, you didn't hear me say that, who is investing in the work that I do on the west side, by the way. Once that is paid off, that money is not going back into somebody's coffers. That's not coming to the city it can't be used for anything other than the way it's being used right now. So I don't want anybody to misunderstand that we're walking away from $30 million a year that could be used for something else. Cannot. Unless the law is changed. Now, you can go help us get the law changed, right? So I'm not saying we can't do that. I absolutely think we can. But it's an example of a misnomer that happens where, we should be using that money for something else. Well, that money wouldn't be used for anything else. We may decide that that's not money we want to use for that purpose, but it can't be used somewhere else, some other way.
Without legislative change.
That's all.
I think it was the amount was broken into, it was a third, a third, a third. So a third went to the city, a third goes to the stadium, and a third goes to the tourism bureau.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the 30 million is blank share. I mean, the hotel motel tax is considerably higher than that. I'm talking about blank share is 30 million. The Georgia World Congress gets some, and the ACVB gets some, and the city gets a bit. But 30 million. But no, you're right. You need a law change, and we're stuck for 30 years. I mean, you're not. It's not interesting. Right? Fred's still around.
Don't stay in the hotel.
Okay, and so we're going to open up the questions now for the audience. But before we do, I have one question for all of you guys, which is if there's something that you want people to know about Invest Atlanta or the City of Atlanta and the relationship in terms of economic development, or just something we may have missed and we didn't get a chance to cover tonight, you guys can let them know now.
I believe in the 9 years that I served on that board, and I served in virtually every capacity, right? I was chair of TAD, I was treasurer, I was chair of finance. I had an opportunity to work with virtually everybody inside that organization. And I believe that every person that I worked with was doing the very best they could in the circumstances that they were in. I think it's an amazing group of people that were working there. I was very honored and privileged to have an opportunity to learn from them and work with them. And I believe that with better guidance from the city and more input from the community on what to do, they are ready to enact that. But this is a hardworking, very well-educated, very informed group of people, and it was an honor to work with them.
Yeah, I would agree. It's don't throw the baby out with the bathwater or whatever. It's a great organization. There's amazingly smart and dedicated people there. Amanda used to work. That's there too. It's just government agencies need to evolve. Their purpose shouldn't stay the same, right? So I think this is a natural evolution of an agencies. But you got to keep an eye on things like headcount. Agencies tend to continue to grow. So, how many employees does it have? I think, the way Councilmember Westmoreland, who's standing right here, is really driving the change into this organization to focus on equity and inclusion is exactly what this economy needs right now. Maybe it didn't need that in 2011. In 2011, we were just looking for jobs, but we got that. Employment has risen, and it's recognized, and investment's happening here. Now you just have to make sure it happens in an equitable and inclusive way. Otherwise, you're going to run down the Seattle or San Francisco path. It's hard to kind of undo that. But you have an opportunity now to really pivot that agency and focus it to solve some of these problems before they get worse.
Yeah, I would say, the vast majority of what Invest Atlanta does is not in the pages, sorry, Scott, of newspapers. When it comes to most of what's done, when it comes to affordable housing, when it comes to various grants, when it comes to affordable housing, in regard to land trust, et cetera, that's not what tends to get most of the attention. And so I also don't want that to get lost, although I am also very grateful when bad things get attention too, because that's how you stop bad things. So I'm grateful for that. But I do want people to be aware that there's a lot of great things that happen, and that I believe that we are on a positive trajectory. And yes, Matt does deserve a great deal of the credit for that, and he's now the newest member of the board of Invest Atlanta. And so, yeah, just wanted to say that. And one more time, I do want to, since you pointed it out, just call Representative Dreyer or email and express your support for there to only be one development agency in the city of Atlanta, so that to kind of just take away that argument that, oh, well, if you don't do this terrible thing, they're going to do it, right? So that there's a way to fix this. And in particular, what one version of that bill does is it will require approval from city council for projects that are in the city of Atlanta. So that's kind of a way to kind of bring more democratic accountability into the process from the people who actually live in the city of Atlanta.
So I want to say, this isn't a blame game thing, right? I said, as I look back, that I kind of regret that I had not personally produced. I voted for and cheerlead for every job attraction activity that the staff did, and I thought they did a great job at Invest Atlanta. What we hadn't got our heads around, and maybe we should have, but and I think Brian's right, in the context, things were looking pretty dreary. You wanted to attract jobs. My assumption was this is going to build up our tax base, will allow us to pay our workers better, the city's workers better, the schools' workers better, and so forth. And it was kind of didn't even think unintended consequences. They will bite you in the butt every time when you muck around with market forces. Watch out, that things will happen that you didn't expect. So I think, a lot of people didn't expect the Beltline to be such a gentrifier and cause such distress for people, living near it who can't afford the higher property taxes, whatever. And similarly, I don't think we sort of realize, hey, we bring all these well-paying jobs in, the lower half of the distribution in the city can't get those jobs, and what we're doing is bidding up rents, and they're not paying enough taxes to make it work. So I don't think this is a blame game. I think this is more of a humility thing about watch it. It's always more complicated than you think. But also hold yourself to, the thing I said to Matt when he first got on council, we talked about this, and Ben, Fred, and Bill's here when they came on the board, is always look at what's the per unit cost. What are you paying in subsidy for either for the job that you're bringing in or for the affordable unit that you're subsidizing, and ask yourself, is it reasonable? You want an unreasonable one? It ain't Invest Atlanta, it's the state. The state of Georgia is giving out something like $50,000 a year for jobs in the film industry. And all you get is BS, about this, because of course there are some people who benefit from it, but we are paying, as a state, all of us paying $860 million a year to the movie industry. We are basically employing their workers for them, paying $50,000 a year. For that, we could be paying the school teachers, cops, whatever, it's crazy. So I say, be aware of unintended consequences and look at the cost per whatever it is, because that'll give you a sense of, is this reasonable or is this not?
Okay. And before we get to questions, I do want to acknowledge his name 3 times already. Councilman Matt Westmoreland over here. Give it up for him in the back. Matt, come on up to the front. Come on. You already acknowledged. Come on up. All right. So we'll let Matt say a few words, and then we'll get to some Q&A.
20 seconds. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your comments, and I've talked to each of you a lot over the last few years. As we move forward in this conversation, there's a lot more work to do with Bill and Fred and myself, and I appreciate your insights this evening, and all of you, as we move forward at the city side, would appreciate you reaching out when you're done, when the General Assembly mercifully adjourns the first week of April. Come on over to the city, because there's a lot of work to be done, and we need your voices as well. So thanks for coming out.
Thanks. And we also, I believe, still somebody here from Invest Atlanta as well? Or did I leave? Okay. We did have someone here from Invest Atlanta before.
Michelle, who's a school board member as well.
Right. And so, like I said before, all the questions you guys have in the back, and a lot of the questions you asked them tonight are being taken over to Invest Atlanta, so your voice is actually being heard. So it's really important tonight, if you don't get a question with the panelists, that you at least write them on the wall, that you at least let ThreadATL know, because we're going through negotiations between the City of Atlanta and Invest Atlanta, and your voice counts, and it counts now. And with that said, we're going to open up the floor for anyone else who has questions or comments for any of the panelists here. Not all at once. All right. Wisconsin.
I'll let Matthew go first.
Sure. I'm sure we don't have the same question.
I know we don't either.
Yeah. I'm Matthew Rao, and as Fred alluded to, I co-chair a group called Beltline Rail Now. One thing that's become obvious listening to the 4 of you with all this collective experience and talent and experience with Atlanta, entirely your lives have been spent here. I'm struck by the fact that what Julian says is that we often don't even know what we want out of public policy when it comes to these large developments. And I'm struck by what Brian says, that there is no model out there for how to get there. No other city has figured this out yet. And what I see is that there must be, and the 4 of you are uniquely qualified to take a stab at this, there must be a way to integrate 4 types of policy, and that's housing policy, tax policy, transit policy, and zoning/land use policy into a strategy that produces that thing that we want, so that those of us who are more lay people than you are can visualize it. And that's what I don't see.
So I want If there was just us sitting in a room and we decided that this was going to be what we wanted to do, this group could probably come up with a policy on all of that integrated well together. But there are property owners, there are business owners, there are commercial owners, there are across the spectrum, there are people and organizations that have a wide variety of requirements for what they want out of the community in which they live, play, pray, work, own property. And the hardest part of being a community is making sure that we respect all of the voices in that conversation. And that's why it's so complicated. Because I may not agree with my very wealthy counterparts sitting somewhere in Buckhead, but they have a voice as well. And that part makes this a very complicated conversation. And it's why no one community, no one place has worked it out, because each of them have unique needs. What I think Atlanta is trying to do is make a space like this and other places where we can have those conversations. My hope is that Invest Atlanta can do a better job of facilitating that space and help the city make choices and set policies that respect all of the voices. If I had the zoo and I ran it myself, though, I would remind them that it is the people in the city that are the heavier weight.
And, sir, I believe you had a question?
Yes, sir. I actually have a two-parter. My name's Rick Hudson, and I wear a lot of hats, from Beltline Rail now to Grant Park Land Use and Zoning for the past 16 years. First part, suggestion as y'all are working on the MOU, or the joint agreement for Invest Atlanta in the city, remove the power, a lot of the power from the mayor. Put the mayor on as an ex officio board member instead of giving her the slam dunk, or giving the mayor in general the slam dunk. Because as Julian said, Kasim brought in the jobs, but we gave out the money. Kasim took the money from other places that he shouldn't have taken the money, because he wanted the money for this project or that project. We know that. Look at the bridge over on Northside Drive. Prime example. But I would figure out a way to get, right now I see a lot of people on Invest Atlanta board, but I don't see the regular workers as being represented. I see Anna as being a citizen representative. And Bill. But by the same token, you don't see Miss Johnny Mae that lives two doors down from me, or, for instance, some of the ladies that are living in public housing. How do their voices be heard? How are they heard in the grand scheme of things? And we need to work on that as you work on the Invest Atlanta board, so that you have multiple citizen voices there, because there's really a melange of citizens that would need to be heard at that point.
I just want to make a quick comment on that. This city has the NPU system, right? I know it's not been effective, but CCI has been working on really rethinking it and making it more effective. And that's the idea, is to make sure that the community is more connected into all these agencies and driving some of the decisions.
Okay.
Yeah, two-part, right?
My second part is, how does Atlanta become the city that can finish what it starts? We've had promise after promise, and they never complete. They'll get 10% done, 20% done, and they go by the wayside.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Like an example, right?
Okay, prime example is Atlanta Beltline.
But it's a 25-year project.
No, right now we're being told that we will not have transit on the Beltline until 2040. Starting transit, mind you, not transit on the Beltline. But this was supposed to be a 25-year project from 2005, 2006.
Well, nothing started.
So
I understand.
The numbers were never realistic, and then the Great Recession knocked them for six. And then you have projects like, you know, the biggest property, the most valuable property on the Beltline still does not pay any taxes into the Beltline TAD, right? Pond City Market. So I think I want to pick up on a couple of points. One is the issue of power in the city, and I started by saying the mayor has the power in the city, has had the power in the city. I think that's changing a little bit. You saw the
got a weak mayor.
You saw the deal. I'm not going to comment on that. You saw the deal just 2 months ago now, where the new city project, Ralph McGill, wanted $22.5 million tax break that would have removed that money from the Beltline tab, right? So puts off your affordable housing promise on the Beltline, puts that off, and the transit's damned expensive. But that power issue, because when I was on the board, that would have gone through. Not because I was voting for it, I was screaming against it. When Jim Irwin went for the murder Kroger building, he got a $9 million tax break there. I was looking at the board and saying, what on earth do you think you're doing? We have a Beltline to fund here, and you're going to do this? And I think Bill voted with me, and I think that was probably 2 of us. I don't remember. But, we were outvoted. It was going to be 7-2 against on that one. Things have shifted, which is great. There's various reasons for that. It's not just the mayor, but parliament. The other thing I want to pick up on is the realism thing, which I think is kind of what Anna was responding to you about. On affordable housing, one of the problems is that new construction costs have gone sky high. Transit is also extremely expensive, as you know. And so what I don't understand is why those costs have gone sort of massively up relative to, tax base, if you like, relative to people's incomes. But there are, in other words, maybe not quite a physical reality, but close to a physical reality that you just gotta get your head around. That some things are not going to happen because we simply can't afford them. One can certainly investigate why these things are so damned expensive, but they are. And by the way, on affordable housing, my view is we need to be grabbing old multifamily and keeping it, preserving it in fairly modest condition, as Anna was describing the homes, individual, I think, single homes, she was talking about mostly in the chapter. We need to be grabbing those because we can't afford to build new ones and then make them affordable.
I agree with that last part, but I do want to really quickly say that in 2016, we did vote to tax ourselves for public transit in the city of Atlanta, right?
And then we spent $800.
So there's a very specific pot of money that we're talking about, and so I just want to kind of point that piece of it out.
We have another question. Oh, okay.
So one of the things we talked about just now was the price of construction increasing. Right? So I came out of the construction industry, and it's increasing because we have the same amount of workforce and have way more work to do. After the recession, everyone left. They're not coming back. It was 40% of our job force in 1 to 2 years. Right? So think about that. Think about half the people in your job left. And then you got busier than you were before that. Right? Everyone there is going to be overworked and they're going to say, I want a raise. Right? That's really what's happening. The sub costs are getting up there. It's not material cost, even though that's a little bit happening right now. It's really just labor cost. There's way more work than there are people to do it, so the costs are increasing. That's not going to change unless we nationally plan on doing something different like that. Land is going to keep getting more expensive as well. So as far as I agree with you on grabbing stuff early, and that's something we should have done. That's looking backwards though, not something we can do. We're doing the same thing with transportation, which is a problem. Right? You're pushing that fee down the plate, and it's never going to be any cheaper than it is today. Right? It's never going to cost one penny less to lay a mile of rail. Right? And I think what we're not doing is we're not using innovative ideas really to put solutions. Like there's one that I love is like an autonomous vehicle idea, right? A wheel autonomous vehicle, you can change patterns as things develop, things like that. They're way less expensive, but we're all stuck in this. How are we going to get a train from here to here? All right, and I get that that's how things have happened before. Lots of other places are using all kinds of creative ideas to get there. I mean, South America, we're using McGowan and things like that. There's all kinds of ways to do this that that have to think outside the box. We're not a forward-thinking city when it comes to this thing. We are reactive. The developers, at least on that side, are doing the things that they've already seen been done. Everything through 5 stories, stick on a podium, not whole lot of doing it, not helping us density-wise. I mean, it is what it is, you know? So I think, but then when someone comes up with something creative, I don't really believe they get the support, honestly, from you guys and from the city, you know? I think you guys like to work with the people you know that are, this is not trying two-person. Brokers are the same way. They want to sell to people that they know who's doing stuff. The big five, or they're selling they're selling to this person, it's like it's all the same people working together, and all the people with the new ideas are having a lot of problems getting any traction with you guys and then with the city. And I get that you only want to back a winning horse, which is really well. I mean, I've talked to investors. I sit down with them, but they don't want to really risk a lot. You know, they want to know this guy builds all this stuff over here. We give this guy to him, we know what's going to happen instantly. Right? Instead of doing that person that's new to the idea, the support to help them get it done. Which is, I mean, these ideas aren't going to work. What we're doing right now is obviously not working. We're not doing anything really different. Nothing's coming from outside the box. And the people that I know that are thinking those things aren't really getting the help from Invest and the city to really get enough. I actually love Invest. Like, I actually work with you guys in school, but I've seen that, you know? So I just think there's a way you guys can kind of use innovation and think of some different ideas to get things done instead of just plodding along with the same people, hoping they change the way they do things.
Hold on, we had a question from the woman in the back. Yes.
Hi, so my name is Diane Bush. I am in the construction industry, but I want to turn back to incentives. That's my question. How, I understand that all the rhetoric around the gulch, but how can we as a city or state balance giving incentives so that we get the sales and use tax, we get the hotel motel tax, we get the tourism dollars back in here, so that the city can attract those things. And I get it about affordable housing. It does seem like it's like, you know, the city goes out and give incentives to bring in something, and then someone remembers affordable housing at the last minute, and it becomes a catchphrase, and we go, okay, we need affordable housing. So how do you balance it? Do you not give out any incentives at all, and you wait and hope that those businesses come in?
Okay, you're asking all the right questions, and there are 10 or 12 states and about a dozen cities now who are doing what I think Atlanta needs to be doing. And that is, annually, there needs to be a scorecard that looks at all of the incentives by category and determines what the ROI on those. So this is what we incentivized, this is what we thought we were going to get out of it, did we get it, and how close did we get, and did we meet or exceed our expectations on that? If we didn't, we're not doing that anymore. And if it did well, we're going to put more money into it, right? And we're missing an opportunity. This is where Investment and the city of Atlanta really need, I believe, to put their money where their mouth is. They've got to start assessing what they're doing and how they're doing it, and then determine and make smart public policy decisions around where to continue to fund and where to stop.
All right, we have a question right here.
To that point with the...
We're going to
I'll promise to be really, really quick. So I just want to give you, so today in our Economic Development Committee meeting, I wasn't actually trying to use this prop. I was trying to use something else. But this is an example of what we did today in our Economic Development meeting. We went and saw incentives that have been given in the way of what are called Economic Opportunity Fund grants, and assessed, have they brought in the jobs they said? What are the average wages? How many are in the city of Atlanta, et cetera? And one of the things that was also brought up, though, in that meeting was that we want more granular data, right? We want data by zip code, not just the city, and what we also want is an assessment of what are the average wages per zip code of the employees, right? So as we move more toward equity, I absolutely agree on scorecard. I like what we're getting, but we need way far, far more, and we don't just need it with the Economic Opportunity Fund grants. We absolutely need it with the tax dollars.
Take a look at Philadelphia this good.
Thank you.
Really good.
I was going to say, Julian, I know she had a hand for a while.
Sure. Well, it is in line with the scorecard and your point. Is there a formal mechanism in place right now for clawback? So, like, if okay, and so can you explain a little bit how that works?
So it's only in place for the grants, right? Which is why I actually prefer grants the tax breaks. They're more targeted, and there's opportunities for clawback provisions. And so for the clawbacks, it's 80 if they meet 80% of their commitments with respect to job creation and with respect to investment, then there's no clawback. If they don't meet that, then then you can have a prorated clawback.
So back on like the question before, I think a couple of things. In addition to metrics and sort of looking back, and absolutely Investland needs to do a whole lot more of that. What did we say we're going to get? What did we get? Probably for every major transaction would be a good exercise and a learning exercise. But to start with, you need your own priorities and you need to be more proactive, right? And that's where Investland has tended to be reactive. Developers bring something, and we say yes or no to subsidizing. It's much better to say, okay, if affordable housing, if a more equitable city and affordable housing is going to be a major component of that, then go after that, and don't be just sitting around waiting for somebody to say, well, I'm going to build a luxury building. I want a tax break, and I'll give you a few subsidized units for a few years. That's silly and outrageously expensive, as I described. So you've got to be looking at it all, but more proactive and priorities driven. And I think this MOU will probably IGA will probably help in that regard.
Okay, we had a question in the back.
So I've heard a lot about, I guess, there being tax breaks and that being money that's being given away. Can that be explained a little bit further? Are actual checks being written out to developers, or is this money just not being paid by the developer over a set amount of years? And I'm speaking more towards the Gulch, where it seems like a lot of people are very much against it, but what I'm not understanding is, has there been some type of economic study done to show maybe the benefits or maybe the negatives that are going to come out of it? I definitely understand it's a lot of money that's being given away, or that's a tax break, but I'm not understanding necessarily the narrative that the money is being given away. Because if nothing is built there, and I'm sure something will be built there, it's a great space, but in theory, if nothing is built there, then there are no taxes at all that will be generated, no jobs.
Right, that's right. So the thing is, if we were out of land, right? If we were out of land in this city, then what you're saying is absolutely true. Hey, you're not going to get the taxes anyway. Here's the thing: we're not out of land. Those office buildings, they're talking about 9 million square feet, which is about 9 years of office growth in the whole city. Okay, it's a choice of it either goes there and pays no taxes for 20 years, no property taxes for 20 years, and retail won't pay sales taxes for 30 years. 5 of the 8.9 pennies. Or, if we don't go with that deal, then those buildings are going to go up elsewhere in our city, which is not short of land. Because that's simple economics. That's simple economics, that we've got land that is a lot cheaper to develop than that hole in the ground.
They haven't developed that land that you're speaking about. That's the thing. You're saying that it's simple economics, that they would build on land because it's there. But they haven't built on that land that's been there for X amount of years. That's
No, I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I'm saying, if we do not agree to that, we did, the council eventually did on a very narrow vote after 10 weeks of struggle. Council was, a couple more arms were twisted, they gave the deal. So now it's in the courts because a bunch of us figured it not only was it a bad deal, but it's also there are big legal and constitutional problems with it. We'll see what the Supreme Court of Georgia decides. But back on the economics of it, what I'm saying is, if my group is successful and the deal doesn't go through, then I don't believe that hole in the ground is going to get built on anytime soon, because it's a lot more expensive to build there than it is to build in lots of other parts of town, which would pay taxes. And I want to see the taxes coming in. So it's a real cost, it's a real loss of revenue. If it happens there with that deal, we don't get all those revenues. If it happens, if those same offices, the offices are going to get built to meet demand for offices. They're not bringing offices to the party, right? So that's it, and that's it. I don't think it's a useful thing to keep debating.
Hold on 1 second. Before, this is going to have to be our last one, but I think you guys should keep this going offline. Anna, you're going to have the last word.
Okay. So I told you I was born and raised here. I've seen underground Atlanta since 1961. I know, I look great.
Of course you're fabulous, Anna.
Thank you, darling. That has been a sore hole in the ground for this city my entire life. I agree with you. I don't agree with Julian. I think that underground needs to get developed. No, it's not underground. The gulch, the hole in the ground, right? The hole in the ground has been a hole in the ground for what? Its entire existence. No. And I think that the opportunity to fill that hole in the ground is here. It's in this moment. And either the city is going to pay to fix the infrastructure to make it look viable, which is not going to happen, because it is in a million pieces owned by dozens of people, and you can't get them all in the same room to do that. But a developer who puts together a development plan and puts all the people in the room because they're incentivized to do that, can do that. And they can build the infrastructure that needs to be built, and it can get developed. And personally, I believe that that would be an important thing for the city to do. I think that I don't necessarily believe that if they don't build there, they'll build somewhere else inside the city. It's entirely possible that they will go outside the city and build outside the city, and that hole in the floor that's been there for 100 years stays for another, several decades. I think that we've missed an opportunity because I don't think we negotiated a good deal. This piece I agree with, but I do believe that we should have a plan in place, and we need to move forward with doing something with the gulch, and this is the moment when it needs to happen.
So, I think this is a microcosm of what are your priorities, right? Filling in a hole in the ground and making a few people wealthy, or do you want an equitable city? Because you can't have both.
You can.
No, Anna, we can argue or split it, but we gotta go.
I want to live on a slightly happier note, although the fireworks are made for interesting, important moments. Part of the question that kind of all of you are asking in a way, right? Some of it goes to, again, this but-for test. Is this something that will happen but for the incentive? And people just have different perspectives about that. And then the other piece of it is the fact that it's a speculative project versus a project that involves direct jobs, right? And these are the sorts of questions that I think anyone who's thinking about incentives should always be asking, even though they came to different conclusions about this project, and I came to a different conclusion than you about this project. Those are the questions that we're asking, and those are the questions that you should demand that we ask.
Okay, and thank you guys for coming out. Again, I'll be here for a while, but we do need to leave in a decent amount of time here at CCI. But before that, I want you guys to know two things. If you want to get your opinion heard about other things regarding both Invest Atlanta and also economic development in Atlanta, there are two events in particular I want you guys to keep in mind, which is February 24th, between 6 and 8 p.m. at the Ben Hill Recreation Center, as well as February 26th from 6 to 8 p.m. at Atlanta Technical College. So again, February 24th from 6 to 8 p.m. at the Ben Hill Rec Center, and February 26th, 6 to 8 p.m. at the Atlanta Technical College. Again, if you want to talk to more people about Invest Atlanta or people in economic development within the city, make sure you come out to those two particular events. On behalf of ThreadATL, thank you guys for coming out tonight. If you want to reach us or reach any of the panelists, we'll have the information on our website at threadatl.org or on all social media at ThreadATL, or for some people who still use Facebook, it's facebook.com/ThreadATL.
Just real quick, definitely a shout out to King Williams for moderating this. It was excellent. We were astounded that we were able to get the expertise of the panel that we have here tonight. Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Brian. There were a lot of people here tonight. Make sure you mingle for a little bit. Leave your questions. We will try to answer them. Our next two panels that we're hoping to look for, obviously there's a discussion about the gulch that still has to happen, and we're trying to work on something about affordable housing specifically. Follow ThreadATL. Thank you so much for coming out. We'll try to have beer and wine next time. He kind of promised that, so we'll work with that. Thank you so much, and again, thank you so much to the panelists.